Hey guys, tonight we begin with a garden bathed in moonlight, its hedges clipped into absurd shapes by royal decree, the scent of lavender thick in the air. A breeze whispers over a polished marble fountain, and somewhere near the edge of the queen's private topiary maze you hear the soft clink of metal. It's not wind chimes, it's steel. A drunken nobleman is stumbling through the queen's garden, muttering something about honor cherries and that bastard wearing green. His shirt is open, his boots unlaced, and he smells like wine horses and a bad decision. A second man, taller, angrier, equally intoxicated, stalks after him. He's got a rapier in one hand and a sliced grape in the other. That grape was from his cup, and the man now walking away spilled it. You watch from between the hedgerows. You didn't ask for this. You were just trying to get to the pavilion for the midnight snacks, but now you're locked into it. They square off beneath the queen's prized rose arch. One of them fumbles to bow. The other belches. It's a duel, all right. This isn't some grand battlefield. There's no audience but the moon and the silent marble statues, watching with eternal disapproval. But make no mistake, this is a real fight. Honor in the court is a delicate thing, and one spilled cup of wine during the midsummer feast is enough to demand blood. The first slash is clumsy. It hits air and nearly knocks its wielder off balance. The second noble steps in surprisingly deft despite the wine. His rapier flicks forward like a snake's tongue, kissing his opponent's sleeve, then retreating. No blood yet, just linen torn. The crowd of ornamental birds carved into stone remain unimpressed. Here's a fun fact to keep you grounded. In late medieval France, nobles were technically forbidden to duel without royal permission. But enforcement spotty. If you were caught, you might pay a fine or worse, lose your favor at court. But if no one saw the duel, well, as historians often admit, legal records are strangely silent on affairs settled after sunset. The wine swiller stumbles forward, gripping his blade like it's a cricket bat. He roars, slashes, and hits a potted hydrangea. A blue explosion of petals fills the air like confetti. You cough quietly. "You killed Marguerite," the other noble hisses. Apparently, that was the flower's name. Another lunge. This time, steel hits steel. The ring of contact echoes through the garden louder than it should be. A pair of swans in the distant pond start squawking. One of them definitely says a word you're not allowed to repeat. A butterfly drifts between the fighters. It almost gets sliced in two. You take a step back, brushing against the hedge. A thorn catches your sleeve. Great. You're part of the crime scene now. Here's where it gets surreal. Duels like this actually happened sometimes over matters as trivial as who sat closer to the king at dinner. One famous account in Burgundy even mentions a duel beginning over a mistaken insult shouted across a banquet table, aimed at someone else entirely. Now the taller noble goes for a feint. He dips low, flicks high, and leaves a scratch across his rival's forearm. Not deep, but enough. A single drop of blood hits the rose-covered gravel. They pause, both panting, both unsure what to do next. This is the moment where historians argue. Some scholars claim that such duels often stopped at first blood, a token of bravery more than a fight to the death. Others believe the nobles sometimes agreed beforehand how far to go. But with wine in the veins and pride on the line, plans can unravel faster than a court seamstress during scandal season. The wounded man lurches forward. His blade swings wide. The other parries with unexpected elegance. The wounded man spins, loses his balance, and yes, falls face first into a decorative bush shaped like a swan. The sword, it clatters across the stones. The man groans. You expect the victor to deliver a witty insult. Maybe something like, "You've been hedged out." But instead he slumps to one knee, wipes sweat from his brow, and throws up on the queen's lilies. It's at this point that you remember you were going to get snacks. You slowly back away, pretending none of this happened. The last thing you want is to be called as a witness. That could mean hours of paperwork, and worse, missing dessert. Behind you, the two nobles mumble at each other. One helps the other up. There's talk of brandy. Maybe this won't go on record after all. And speaking of records, did you know that some medieval nobles kept personal duel diaries, not for bragging, but for legal protection, just in case the other guy died and their story needed a little polishing? One diary from a minor German count lists 11 duels, 3 of them involving bread, 1 involving a dog, and 1 mysteriously marked only as incident with cheese wheel. The queen's moonlit garden begins to quiet again. The statues resume their endless, judgmental silence. You step past a broken goblet stem, careful not to cut your foot. The night is young, and in medieval court society, tempers were cheap, steel was sharp, and gardeners had very busy mornings. You exit through the vine gate, still thinking about those snacks. Your stomach growls. Behind you, someone sneezes. Could be the start of another duel. But that's someone else's problem now. You're halfway to the kitchens when you hear it shouting. Not the angry, honor-bound howls of nobles in love or war, but the high-pitched outrage of someone whose pie just got insulted. And not just any pie. The pie. You peek around a stone pillar into the servants' courtyard, lit by a handful of lanterns and the dull glow of fire from the bakehouse chimney. The scene before you is, well, let's just say it has escalated. A heavily armored knight, Sir Gerald of Fenwick, if memory serves, is red in the face, jabbing a gauntleted finger at a rotund, flour-dusted man, holding a large wooden spoon like a war hammer. That's Cook Barnaby, keeper of the Royal Crusts, destroyer of underbaked centers, and inventor of something he proudly calls meat surprise. The argument started over a pie crust. Specifically, Sir Gerald claimed it was limp as a bishop's handshake. Cook Barnaby disagreed. Now we're here. Draw your ladle or draw your sword. Barnaby bellows, though it's unclear whether that's metaphorical. Sir Gerald clearly doesn't think so. He unbuckles his blade with theatrical flair. Here's a historical tidbit for your collection. Knights were technically supposed to only fight equals, cooks not equals. But if a knight felt publicly humiliated, especially by a commoner, he might bend the rules. And if the cook had friends in the royal kitchens, suddenly, that knight might find his venison stew tasting, suspiciously, of spit. Barnaby is not backing down. He tosses aside his spoon, reaches under the butcher's table, and pulls out a cleaver. Not just any cleaver, his dueling cleaver. It's engraved with tiny chickens, and possibly teeth marks. Now you're invested. Sir Gerald circles left, keeping his boots planted wide like he's expecting cavalry. Barnaby circles right, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, like he's done this before, and rumor has it he has. At least twice. Once with a minstrel over a goose, and once with the royal brewer about the definition of ale. They lunge at the same time. Steel clashes with steel, though really it's more like sword meets cleaver meets table leg. Barnaby ducks, swings, and takes out a ham. Sir Gerald yelps as a bone flies past his ear. The cleaver nicks his cloak, just barely missing the ornate embroidery of his family crest, a duck eating a trumpet. My mother sewed that Gerald roars. The fight spills into the alley. Flour bursts into the air like battlefield smoke. A barrel of onions tips, adding unexpected hazards to the terrain. Both men slip. Gerald recovers first and jabs forward. His sword grazes Barnaby's side, cutting through apron and pride. Barnaby grunts, wipes his face, and throws salt into Gerald's eyes. Yes, salt, from a pouch at his belt. You can't help but smile. It's so petty, so personal, so medieval. And here's where it gets interesting. There are real records of cooks challenging knights, especially in castle towns, where class lines blurred more than people liked to admit. One 14th century Flemish scroll details a cook who stabbed a knight in the leg with a skewer during an argument about sausages. The knight survived, the cook was fined, and sausages were thenceforth labeled by weight and spiciness. Barnaby lunges again, this time swinging wild. His cleaver bites into a wooden beam sticks. Gerald kicks the cook square in the belly, not hard enough to kill, but enough to send flour puffing into the air again. Barnaby stumbles, then drops. Not unconscious, just winded. He sits there panting, wheezing, hand raised in mock surrender. You win, he grunts. But you still don't know pie. Gerald points his sword dramatically, then falters. I don't need to know pie, he wheezes. I'm a knight. But even he knows that sounds weak. This is where historians still argue. Was this sort of 1v1 fight a crime or just culture? Some scholars say these unsanctioned duels were unofficially tolerated, especially when they involved non-lethal comedic resolution. Others argue that any blood drawn without a warrant could be punished, though often the ruling depended on who had more friends at court. As it turns out, Barnaby does have friends. 2 stable boys and a scullery maid appear at the alley entrance armed with various cooking tools. Gerald sees them, sighs, and lowers his sword. Fine, he mutters. The crust was crisp. Barnaby smiles, still wheezing. And the filling. Gerald closes his eyes. Juicy. You slip away before the reconciliation turns awkward. Behind you, Barnaby's wheezy laughter mingles with the sound of someone pouring ale, possibly onto a wound, possibly just into a cup. And you wonder how many of these fights happened every week, probably more than anyone dared to document. After all, who wants to write down the moment they lost a duel to a man holding a gravy boat? Here's a fun fringe detail. Some kitchens had designated argument corners, a sort of culinary ring for settling disputes, usually involving blunt objects and witnessed by the head cook. Loser did dishes. Winner got bragging rights and maybe a bigger slice of bread pudding. The alley quiets as Barnaby groans and peels flour from his face. Gerald wanders off in the direction of the stables, muttering something about pie-craft sorcery. You continue your night's journey, appetite slightly ruined, but curiosity fully awakened. Who else out here is fighting dirty little duels over things like soup soap or spoon placement? Only one way to find out. The Abbey bell tolls, once low, somber, and far too loud for this hour of night. You feel it in your ribs. Somewhere ahead, past rows of stone cloisters and candle-lit windows, someone is arguing. You'd ignore it, but the voices echo weirdly off the vaulted arches. One sounds like it's quoting scripture. The other is quoting threats. You follow the noise. Beneath a crumbling fresco of Saint Ulrich, who seems to be judging everyone, 2 priests in full robes stand 3 feet apart, panting, red-faced and clutching long, iron-tipped walking staffs. One of them, Father Osric, has a smudge of wine on his collar. The other, Brother Tannen, is already bleeding from the ear. You have stumbled into a theological duel. Because of course you have. Here's the backstory, whispered by a nearby novice. A chalice was broken, a very old one. Brother Tannen blames Osric, who blames the floor, who blames the angle, who blames gravity, and possibly the devil. The argument began in Latin. It's now in angry grunts. And yes, it's about to become a 1v1 staff fight. Fun historical fact, clerics weren't supposed to shed blood. That was canon law. So when fights did happen between clergy, they tended to use blunted weapons, staves, maces, or even bookstands. The idea was to beat your opponent into submission without technically spilling anything that would upset Rome. Naturally, that law got very creatively interpreted. Brother Tannen lunges first, swinging his staff low in a surprisingly athletic arc for someone who quotes psalms at sunrise. Osric dodges barely and returns with a wild overhead strike that cracks loudly against the cobbles. The echo makes it sound worse than it is, probably. "You owe me a chalice," Tannen roars. "You shouldn't have put it on the edge," Osric counters. Another swing. Osric stumbles backward into a potted rosemary bush. Tannen presses forward, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like a curse, both magical and foul-mouthed. The abbey cat watches from a wall, unimpressed. This isn't the first time clergy have fought like this. In fact, medieval records are filled with ecclesiastical brawls. One English account from the 13th century describes two monks fighting so loudly during Vespers that the bishop had to excommunicate them mid-prayer. Another tale mentions a bishop who kept a debating stick in his study. It was 6 feet long and very persuasive. The fight continues. Osric swings again, catching Tannen in the thigh. Tannen yells, then retaliates with a jab to the ribs. You wince, but they both stay upright. And here's where scholars still argue, was this kind of violence tolerated or quietly punished? Some say the church turned a blind eye as long as no one died. Others suggest local abbots secretly encouraged it to resolve disputes the old-fashioned way, like holy bar fights with Latin footnotes. Osric feints, then swings sideways, and his staff shatters a wooden bench. Splinters fly. Tannen gasps. That bench was from the 11th century, or at least looked like it. Both men pause, winded. Osric leans on his staff. Tannen wipes his face with his sleeve and mutters something about turning the other cheek being optional when furniture is involved. You hear footsteps. The abbot approaches, flanked by 2 sleepy acolytes. He surveys the scene. The busted bench. The bruised priests. The chalice fragments now swept sadly into a corner. He sighs. Deeply. Again, he asks. Both men nod sheepishly. The abbot just points to the refectory. Bread. Now. Both of you. And no mead. And like that, the duel ends. No winner. No loser. Just bruises and regret. And maybe one lost sermon about humility. You tiptoe away back into the cool cloister shadows, leaving behind the echoes of holy warfare and the unmistakable sound of 2 grown men blaming each other over bread. Before you forget, here's a fringe detail for your trivia bank. Some monasteries had dispute logs written in margins of larger ledgers, mostly petty stuff. One page from a 15th century French ledger reads, "Brother Paul took my ink. Again. May Saint Benedict curse his nibs." The abbey quiets down. Somewhere in the kitchen, a very flat loaf is being sliced with silent shame. The cat hops off the wall and pads past you with the air of a judge who's seen it all. You move on. The night is still young, and somewhere out there is another duel waiting. Less holy, perhaps. Or somehow even stranger. The night air sharpens as you leave the abbey grounds behind the scent of incense giving way to sweat and horses and the unmistakable tension of public humiliation. You're near the edge of the tournament field. Now empty stands loom like wooden ghosts, creaking slightly in the wind. The banners hang limp, their bright colors dulled by moonlight. What was hours ago a glorious stage of pageantry and chivalric drama is now just a field of churned dirt and discarded garlands. And yet, there's still action here. 2 knights, sir. Aemon of Greywatch and Sir Roderick the Red stand 20 paces apart, stripped of ceremonial armor, wearing only their fighting leathers. Their squires hover nervously at the edge of the field, holding helmets and biting fingernails. This is no scheduled match. No trumpets, no crowd, just quiet fury. It started earlier today during the joust. Sir Aemon accused Roderick of using a weighted lance, something illegal if rarely enforced. Roderick, who lost 3 teeth and his patience in the same hour, claimed Aemon was whining because he got thrown like a sack of cabbages. Now, with the tournament master conveniently retired for the evening, the two have decided to settle things the old way. 1 lance, 1 sword, 1 answer. You settle quietly on a barrel, hoping to stay out of view. Because dueling outside tournament rules, that's serious business. In theory, both men could lose titles or be banished. But as always, enforcement depends on whether anyone writes it down. And you're not writing anything. You're just observing. Here's your official historical fact. Chivalric duels outside of sanctioned events were illegal by most codes, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, when tournaments had strict rules to prevent nobles from dying like peasants. But unsanctioned duels still happened all the time, quietly, viciously, and often in the shadows of the very lists they were banned from. Sir Aemon raises his sword in salute. Roderick responds with a gesture that is not courtly. And then it begins. The clang of steel slices the night like thunder. Roderick charges in heavy and fast, his style all brute force. Aemon ducks, sidesteps, flicks his blade in a tight arc that sings against Roderick's pauldron. No damage. Roderick counters with a backhand swing that shaves off a button from Aemon's jerkin. You weighted your lance, Aemon yells. You weighted your head, Roderick snarls back. They circle boots, grinding dust and old flower petals into the earth. You can hear the breath rasping in their throats, the hiss of leather stretching, the occasional grunt when a blow lands on ribs or thigh. It's vicious, efficient, personal, and not entirely uncommon. In fact, some knights carried duel tokens, small items like gloves, ribbons, or rings meant to be thrown at a rival's feet as a formal challenge. If accepted, the duel had to happen within a day. Deny it, and your reputation might never recover. Aemon lands a sharp blow to Roderick's arm. Roderick counters by tackling him. Yes, just bam. Full shoulder into the gut. They crash into the dirt. Swords fly. Fists take over. You wince as Aemon lands a punch directly on Roderick's bruised jaw. Roderick rolls, grabs a fistful of dirt and flings it upward. Aemon chokes, coughing. It's not graceful. It's not romantic. It's angry and absurd and very, very real. Which brings us to the scholarly debate. Were such duels truly about honor, or just legal street fights with better outfits? Some historians argue that chivalry was more PR than principle, a way to frame violence in poetry and pageantry. Others believe knights genuinely followed their codes, even if those codes conveniently allowed for a little mayhem between sunset and breakfast. Back in the dirt, Roderick manages to regain his sword. Aemon scrambles to his feet just in time to parry. Both men are bleeding from the mouth. One of them might have a broken rib, but neither backs down. Then something unexpected. A horn. A real one. You turn. It's the tournament master, still in his night robe, riding a donkey. He looks furious. Are you idiots bleeding on my field? Both knights freeze. Silence. Then Roderick coughs. Aemon straightens up. Just practicing, Aemon says. With real swords, the master snaps. It's a real tournament, Roderick adds weakly. The master sighs with the weariness of a man who's seen too many romantic ballads end in tooth loss. He waves them off like misbehaving children. Get off my dirt. And like that, it's over. The squires rush in, offering cloth and water. The knights stagger away, still glaring but too tired to throw another punch. One of them might write a poem about this later. The other will probably bribe the poet. As they disappear into the shadows, you remain seated, heart still thudding, wondering how many such duels were covered up with excuses and honorific metaphors. Probably hundreds. Here's your fringe detail. Before you go, some duels were disguised as midnight training sessions, an excuse that shows up often in tournament records, which of course only raises more questions. Like why so many knights trained at midnight? With real swords and broken noses. You slip away again, brushing dust from your clothes, already forgetting who threw the first punch. What matters is the story, and the fact that honor apparently has no bedtime. You've barely cleared the tournament grounds when you hear the soft clink of metal above you. You pause. Look up. It's a rooftop. On that rooftop are two figures silhouetted by moonlight, balanced like cats on the narrow ridge tiles. One is lithe, wearing a doublet too fine for alley travel. The other wears a flowing coat, wind catching the edge like a cape. They move slowly, carefully. Not with stealth, but with tension. The kind of tension you only get when romance goes very wrong. You find a better angle ducking behind a chimney vent. The woman on the rooftop, it's Lady Annalise, the Duke's niece. Her glove lies between the two men. Not just dropped, no. Placed, with purpose, on the tile ridge like an invitation or a trap. One of the men speaks, "She gave me the glove, Corwin." The other snorts, "She gave it to me last week, along with her kiss." "Well, tonight she gave me a note." There's a long pause. Then a sword is drawn. You're about to witness something rare and exquisitely stupid, a duel for love fought on a rooftop. Historically speaking, these were real. They usually happened in cities where noble sons had too much time, too many hormones, and not enough common sense. One Venetian record from 1427 mentions a duel atop a bell tower over a silk scarf and the affections of a merchant's daughter. The survivor limped for life. The girl married someone else. Back on the rooftop, the two men begin to circle. Not fast. They're testing the tiles. Every step threatens to slip. Neither wants to die for love and poor footing. Corwin, taller, wiry, lunges first. His blade glints, then scrapes against roof slates as he misses. Julienne counters low and cautious, forcing Corwin back a step. "I was first," Corwin hisses. "She doesn't care about first," Julienne growls. "She cares about fencing." You quietly root for the tiles. The fight is tense, not flashy. The blades whisper rather than clash. Both men are clearly trained. Not battlefield soldiers, duelists. The type who practice in salons with tutors and say things like touché during breakfast. Julienne lands the first real strike, a shallow cut to Corwin's forearm. Nothing serious, but enough to make him hiss and redouble his effort. Corwin responds with a flurry of desperate strikes that send a loose tile tumbling into the alley. You hear it hit with a crisp, echoing clack. Now here's your required scholarly debate. Did women truly offer gloves as love tokens to spark duels, or was this a chivalric myth? Some historians argue gloves were sacred signals of affection or favor. Others believe these stories were largely manufactured, romanticized tales written by poets with too many sponsors and not enough accountability. The truth is probably somewhere in between, like a love letter that was sort of meant seriously but mostly meant to stir the pot. Julienne presses in, controlling the pace now. Corwin is breathing hard, his stance faltering. "Give up," Julienne says. "She wants me." Corwin snarls and steps in too close. Too close. His foot hits a slippery patch, moss or dew, and slides. There's a sickening moment of silence as he flails arms, pinwheeling. Julien tries to grab him, fails. Corwin falls, but not all the way. You peer over the alley's edge and see him dangling, clinging to a windowsill 2 stories below, feet scrabbling at brick. He's not dead. But he's definitely not climbing back up anytime soon. Julien sheathes his blade and sighs. Then he picks up the glove, and to your astonishment, throws it into the chimney. You blink. Did he just... He did. Neither of us, he mutters and vanishes into the shadows. Now here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some duels over love ended with both parties walking away. Not from nobility or forgiveness, just sheer exhaustion or cold realization. One 15th century tale from Florence describes 2 poets dueling with quills, yes, quills, in a public square before declaring the woman too poetic to possess and drinking wine instead. Together. The glove, meanwhile, burns inside the chimney somewhere. You imagine the letter that might have come with it. Flowery handwriting, wax seal, smelling faintly of honey and lies. You take a breath, stepping back into the moonlight. Somewhere below, Corwin groans. He'll survive, and probably get a poem out of it. You walk on boots, silent on cobblestones, heart strangely light. That was absurd, beautiful, pointless. Exactly the kind of story someone will exaggerate over wine tomorrow. And for your trivia journal, duels for affection were often unrecorded precisely because they were personal and legally indefensible. But they shaped reputations, gossip, and marriages. Sometimes the winner got the girl. More often, she married someone else with better property. You turn a corner, the rooftop shrinking behind you. Love is dangerous. So are chimneys. You've left behind the rooftops and romance, but not the absurdity. Because now, of course, you're headed into the scriptorium, a place of quiet candles, dried ink pots, and snoring monks bent over parchment. It should be peaceful, it should be, but it's not. A monk is yelling, a monk, yelling. You hear it before you reach the doorway, raspy, furious, echoing off vaulted stone. When you peek in, the scene is perfectly medieval and completely off script. On one side of the room, a high-ranking noble Lord Freyden of Summerthwaite, still wearing a velvet cloak and looking more confused than angry. On the other, Brother Wulfric, the scribe, a thin, pale man with hands stained black from ink and eyes that say he hasn't blinked since Pentecost. Between them on the long oak desk is a parchment, and on that parchment is a family charter, slightly crumpled, freshly torn. This document, Wulfric hisses, is forged. Freyden raises an eyebrow. I paid 3 florins for that, to a man who can't spell his own name. Then Wulfric reaches under his writing table and produces a knife. Not a kitchen blade, not a knight's dagger. A long, thin, curved blade used for trimming parchment and leather. Razor sharp, quietly terrifying. And you realize you're about to witness a duel between a monk and a noble, over a forged charter and apparently a stolen cow. This is the medieval version of courtroom drama, but with more stabbing. You shuffle quietly into the shadows near the bookshelf as Lord Freyden draws his own blade, a ceremonial court dagger with a jeweled hilt, and absolutely no intention of being used in actual combat. Still, it's sharp enough to threaten. And here's your proper historical fact: forgery was common in medieval Europe. Land charters especially were ripe for manipulation. Monks would update documents to benefit their abbey nobles, would bribe scribes to alter boundaries, and disputes frequently ended in violence. The sword of justice, often just a sword. Wulfric strikes first. He slashes downward, aiming not for flesh, but for the offending parchment. Freyden intercepts with a clumsy block, slicing the edge of the desk instead. A candle tips. Wax spills. They circle the table now, breath-ragged blades flashing. It's not elegant. Wulfric is fast, but twitchy. Freyden is stronger, but out of his depth. Their fight is all hissed accusations and grunted insults. You forged the witness names. Wulfric barks, parrying a wild swing. They were hypothetical signatures, Freyden snaps. Everyone does it. Hypothetically, this might end with you bleeding on vellum. And yes, there's precedent for this. One surviving record from a Saxon monastery tells of a monk who attacked a local reeve with a quill knife over a land dispute. The reeve lost part of an ear. The monk got penance. The land still went to the monastery. The fight reaches a strange impasse as Freyden's dagger clinks against an overturned inkwell. Black liquid spreads across the desk like a spill of blood. Both men freeze. There's a long pause, and then Wulfric smiles. It's not a kind smile. He dips his blade into the ink, flicks it forwards, and blinds Freyden temporarily with a splatter of dark sludge. Freyden stumbles back, cursing. Wulfric presses forward, swiping, jabbing, not to kill, but to corner. Within moments, the nobleman is pinned between a bookcase and a stack of firewood, his dagger trembling in one hand, his cloak caught on a hook. "Give me the real charter," Wulfric says. Freyden hesitates, then tosses a second parchment onto the floor. "You never saw me," he mutters. Wulfric sheathes his blade. "I never see anything," he says, wiping ink from his chin. Freyden vanishes into the shadows, cloak dragging pride trailing behind him like a broken hem. Wulfric returns to his seat, calmly retrieves a new sheet of vellum, and begins writing again, same hand, same posture, same furious intensity. You exhale, not because it's over, but because somehow this is what passes for justice tonight. And here's the bit historians still argue over: how much power did scribes really have? Some say they were tools, mere instruments of noble will. Others point out that monks were the literate class, capable of shaping history with one careful stroke. It's hard to fight someone who writes the minutes of your meetings. Freyden is gone. Wulfric is calm. And you quietly admire the strange reality that the most dangerous man in the room wasn't the knight or the baron or even the king. It was the guy with ink on his fingers. Before you leave, here's a wonderfully fringed tidbit, some medieval ink recipes included. Crocodile dung, gallbladder, acid, and rust. Just a few drops of that in your eye could ruin any duel. Possibly you're weak. The scriptorium fades behind you, candles flickering one by one as Wulfric keeps writing. Maybe about the duel. Maybe about a cow. Maybe both. You tiptoe down the stone hallway toward whatever madness waits next. Hopefully, something less deadly. But this is medieval history. Hope is not a reliable companion. There's a gallows tree at the edge of town, an old thing half dead, crooked, and slumped like it's tired of hanging people. It creaks softly in the wind, the noose swaying gently, like it's waiting for someone to make a mistake. Beneath it tonight stands a man in bells, the court jester. And he's not smiling. You pause at a distance, half concealed by a low stone wall. The moonlight glints off the little silver baubles sewn into his doublet. His makeup's half smeared, one cheek still streaked with grease paint, the other with dried blood. He's alone for now, except for the bottle at his feet, but not for long. Heavy boots crunch across gravel. A noble appears, Sir Mathan of Rainsward. Tall, arrogant, not drunk, but drunk enough to do something regrettable. He doesn't see you. He only sees the jester. "I told you," Mathan says, voice thick with wine and menace. "Don't touch my cup again." The jester raises a hand, not in apology, but as if measuring the breeze. "It was poisoned," he says flatly. Matan laughs. "You think that's funny?" The jester doesn't blink. "I think your cook does." And just like that, we're in it. A nobleman insulted, a jester vengeful. One has a sword, the other has bells. But you already know who's more dangerous. Because here's your historical fact. Jesters weren't just clowns, they were spies, confidants, even assassins. Their license to mock royalty often came with a deeper, darker role, telling the truth no one else dared to speak, and sometimes punishing those who mocked them back. Matan draws his sword lazily. "You going to dance for me now, fool?" The jester nods, then moves. Not toward him, around him. Fast. You barely see the flash of steel before Matan jerks back, cursing. Blood blossoms on his forearm, a shallow cut, but a cut all the same. The jester's blade is thin, short, and curved, tucked behind his lute when he arrived hidden in the handle. This isn't the first time he's fought, and probably not the first time he's killed. The duel begins in earnest. Matan swings wide, furious. The jester ducks, low rolls, flicks his blade at the noble's knee. Another slash, another miss. But not by much. There's something wild in the jester's movements. Not chaotic, calculated. Like someone who's practiced in secret dancing, alone with blades instead of jokes. The tree watches silently. Here's the debate historians still chew over. Were jesters truly allowed to strike nobles, or was that a myth born of literary license? Some argue that jesters were untouchable within court boundaries, but fair game outside. Others believe they had hidden training from early guild systems, allowed to protect themselves when jokes became dangerous. Tonight, no one's quoting poetry. Matan snarls and charges. The jester waits, and then sidesteps. And Matan's foot lands in a hole. It's not big, but it's enough. He stumbles, one knee hits the dirt. The jester moves in, blade to throat. Silence. Matan freezes. The jester leans close, and for the first time you see real fury behind the makeup. "You threw me into the moat last month," he says quietly. "You pissed in my mask. You laughed when the queen slapped me for your joke." He pushes the blade just enough to draw a pinprick of blood. "I'm not laughing." Matan swallows. What do you want?" The jester smiles. "Your apology." Loud. There's a long pause. A long breath. "I'm sorry," Matan mutters. Louder. "I'm sorry!" Matan bellows. It echoes across the stones, bouncing off the hanging tree. The jester lowers his blade, and then does something stranger. He hands the sword to Matan. "Hilt first. Try again sometime," he says. "We'll see if you last longer." And with that, he turns and walks away. No flourish, no joke. Just bells softly jingling with each step. Now here's a delightfully obscure tidbit. A few jesters were buried with weapons. One in Bohemia was found with a short dagger hidden inside a hollowed-out flute. His gravestone simply read, "He served 3 kings and outlived them all." The gallows creaks again as Matan slowly sits in the dirt, blade limp in his hand, ego shattered somewhere back near the insult. And you slip away. Not for safety, but out of sheer respect. Because tonight, you learned something new. The most dangerous man in the kingdom isn't the one with armor. It's the one who knows your secrets. The road out of town leads past the mill, a low, groaning structure, huddled next to a stream that's worked harder than half the kingdom. The wheel turns lazily in the moonlight, splashing water in rhythmic slaps. Peaceful, really. Almost serene, except for the two figures yelling at each other in the mud. You sigh. Of course. One wears the robes of a monk, short balding, with the righteous indignation of someone who believes God has very specific opinions about irrigation. The other is broad, red-faced, and covered in flour. A miller. Big hands, no neck, a stick in one hand, and a sack of grain in the other, like it's a weapon. They're chest deep in an argument about water rights, and they are absolutely going to fight. "I built this damn channel," the miller shouts. "You diverted the Lord's stream," the monk snarls. "You're robbing the abbey of flow. The abbey doesn't wash flour. You don't wash at all." And now the miller's stick is raised. The monk's staff is out, and the stream is about to witness a staff duel in the mud, which, to be honest, is kind of poetic. Here's your historical context. Water disputes were serious business in medieval Europe. Streams, powered mills, watered crops, filled tons, and caused endless fights. Millers were frequently accused of altering water flow, sometimes legally, sometimes with a spade, and a total lack of shame. Monasteries, in turn, often had written rights to certain channels dating back centuries, and enforced them with legal threats, holy pressure, or occasionally whacking. The fight begins with posturing, lots of stomping, stick-tapping, and grunting. The monk's staff is longer. The miller's stick is heavier. Neither man seems particularly fast, but they're committed. The first real blow is a slap of wood on wet shoulder. The miller grunts, swings back, hits the monk in the shin with a muddy thud. You wince, imagining bruises blooming like purple lilies. And here's where historians disagree. Were millers simply greedy manipulators or misunderstood entrepreneurs? Some sources paint them as villains, always cheating weights, hoarding flour, stealing water. Others argue they were vital craftsmen, constantly scapegoated by the church and nobility alike. The truth? Probably both. Definitely muddy. The monk jabs forward, catching the miller in the stomach and knocking him back into the stream. There's a glorious splash. The mill wheel spins a little faster, possibly amused. The miller emerges like a sopping troll, roaring in rage. He charges. The monk yelps, backpedals, and slips in a rut. Down he goes. Now both men are soaked, flailing, and still swinging. You feel vaguely bad for the trout. The miller grabs a chunk of wet grain and throws it. It hits the monk square in the face. The monk sputters, possibly swears. Definitely swings harder now. Here's your fringe detail. Some abbeys installed iron grates in streams to prevent water theft. This naturally led to millers inventing grate hooks tools for lifting or disabling said grates without being seen. There are even reports of monks booby-trapping their streams. One German document mentions the Holy Pitfall, which was essentially just a moss-covered hole with a sign saying, "Thou shalt not." Back in the mud, both men are wheezing, covered in silt, bruised but still swinging. Eventually, the monk lands a clean hit, a real one, staff to ribs. The miller gasps, drops his stick, and falls backward into the shallows with a sploosh. The monk plants his staff like a banner, breathing hard, wet robe clinging to his legs, looking like a drowned saint with a vendetta. "You will redivert that stream by morning," he says between gulps of air. The miller coughs, spits out a reed, and grumbles. "Fine, but I want 5 loaves for the trouble." The monk nods. 3. The miller squints. 4 and a scone. Deal. Just like that, the duel ends in the ancient medieval tradition of petty bargaining. You almost applaud. And before you go, one last delicious fact. Millers were often required to host flower inspections where local officials checked for fraud. But more than a few fights broke out during these events. One English record mentions a flower riot in 1382 in which the town reeve lost his tunic and had to walk home in a sack. The monk limps away victorious in both spirit and property law. The miller remains in the water a bit longer, maybe out of pride, maybe because he's tangled in pondweed. And you turn back toward the road, shoes squelching slightly. The night's duel count is climbing, and you're not even halfway through. Up ahead, a falcon screeches. Time to follow the bird. The falcon screams again, not that musical, distant call you hear in tapestries and noble crests, but a raw, angry shriek that cuts across the trees like a blade. You follow it. You're in the hunting woods now. The moon dapples the undergrowth. Twigs crack underfoot. Somewhere ahead, there's a clearing where torches glow dimly, 2, maybe 3. Not enough for a proper hunt, but enough for vengeance. When you reach the edge of the trees, you see them 2 men standing 10 paces apart. One wears a hunter's tunic, oiled leather boots caked in marsh. He's broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with a falconer's gauntlet still strapped to one arm. Empty. The other man, lean, elegant, smug, is dressed in noble green. His glove still has feathers on it. And on the ground between them, barely visible in the grass, a broken bird. One wing folded wrong, the other soaked with blood. You don't need context. You already know. Someone killed someone else's falcon. That's not just a loss, it's war. Here's the hard historical fact. Falcons were priceless in the medieval world, trained for years, worth more than horses, and often treated better than servants. Monarchs gifted falcons as political gestures. One French king reportedly ransomed a nobleman in falcons. To slay another man's bird deliberately or not was an offense bordering on heresy. The falconer draws a long dagger, not a soldier's blade, a woodsman's used for cleaning prey and apparently noble throats. You threw the lure early, he growls. You drew her into your bird's dive. The noble shrugs. Then your bird was weak. The falconer says nothing. Instead, he steps forward, and the duel begins. There's no ceremony, no salute, just sudden violent movement. The noble draws his own dagger, gold on the hilt, too polished for practical use, and blocks the first strike. Sparks fly. The torchlight flares. The fight is fast, close, ugly. The falconer moves like someone who's fought wolves. He strikes low, then high, then punches with his gauntlet hand, catching the noble across the jaw. You hear the crack from the trees. The noble staggers back, spitting blood. You can almost hear the bird screaming again. Here's the debate scholars still mutter about. Did falconers truly hold the social clout to challenge nobles? Some say yes, if they were master falconers protected by patronage and vital to the nobility's status. Others argue such duels were rare and suicidal, likely fictionalized in romantic ballads. But a few charters mention falconers receiving land pensions and once a title. The bird could lift the man. Back in the clearing, the noble lashes out. His dagger slices across the falconer's bicep, opening a dark gash. The falconer doesn't cry out, doesn't slow. He lunges again and tackles the noble into the mud. They wrestle, now blades forgotten. Hands gripping wrists, boots slipping. The falconer's glove presses hard against the noble's throat. The noble grabs a rock, swings. The falconer rolls off, dazed. The noble crawls to his feet, staggered and panting. He's bleeding from the lip, the temple, the pride. You don't get to win, he hisses. I already did, the falconer growls and whistles. There's a blur of feathers. From the dark trees, another falcon, unseen until now, dives, screeching. Its talons rake across the noble's shoulder, tearing cloth-skin dignity. The noble screams, spins flails, and then runs. He doesn't get far, just past the torchlight, just far enough to lose his boots in the marsh. The falcon circles once more triumphant. The falconer kneels beside the broken bird on the ground, cradles it, whispers something you don't hear, and then sets it gently atop a fallen log. You stay where you are, then not wanting to interrupt. Some victories don't need applause or witnesses, just justice. Here's your fringe detail. Some falconers buried their birds with full rites, complete with miniature grave markers and inscriptions. One English falcon was laid to rest with its favorite bell and a sprig of rosemary. The marker read, "She flew straight. She died fast." The woods are quiet again. The torches gutter out. Somewhere in the dark, a noble is limping home, composing a very different version of tonight's events for the court. And you head for the path again, keeping an eye on the sky. Not all guardians walk on two legs. The cathedral looms ahead like a giant asleep on its back stone ribs, arched into the night sky, windows dark, but for a flicker of candlelight at the high altar. You should be heading elsewhere, perhaps away from holy ground entirely, but something draws you forward. A hum of tension, the taste of metal in the air, and voices. Low, furious, echoing off the ancient stones with the kind of quiet intensity that only comes when two men are about to lose control. You slip through a side entrance down a narrow corridor, scented with incense and old books, and step into the nave. Two crusaders stand between the pews. Not soldiers in armor now, but cloaked figures in travel-worn tunics. One's got a bandage wrapped hastily around his jaw. The other clutches a canvas satchel with something wrapped in velvet inside. They're not shouting. They're whispering. Which is much, much worse. It's not the real relic, says the one with the satchel, Sir Alric. Younger, wiry, still sunburnt from the road home. I bled for that relic, snarls the older knight, Sir Ranulph. Broader, meaner. His hand keeps twitching toward his belt, where his blade still sits unsheathed. Alric shakes his head. Then you bled for a tooth from a goat. There's a beat, and then Ranulph lunges. This, dear listener, is what you call a duel in a cathedral aisle. And yes, it's as blasphemous as it sounds. Alric dodges left, knocking over a votive rack. Candles scatter across the flagstones, their flames guttering in small pools of melted wax. Ranulph draws steel with a hiss and charges again. The echo of their blades meeting rings through the vaulted ceilings like a bell tolling for the both of them. Here's your actual historical fact: cathedral duels, while rare, were not unheard of. Especially during the 12th and 13th centuries, when returning crusaders argued over spoils, relics, and debts unpaid. Churches were technically sanctuaries, but some men took that to mean neutral ground, where both parties could meet, and sometimes fight. Ranulph swings hard. Alric parries, then steps behind a column. Stone chips fly as Ranulph's sword bites into the masonry. You sold the real one, didn't you? He growls. Kept the coin. Brought me a fake. I sold nothing. Liar. Alric spins and stabs low, grazing Ranulph's thigh. It's not deep, but it hurts. And now they're both bleeding in a church. Somewhere up high, a stained glass saint watches silently with a look of deep disappointment. Here's where the scholarly debate begins. Were relics real or fabricated for prestige and wealth? Historians still argue it. Some relics had detailed chains of custody, others popped up conveniently after visions. One bishop allegedly had 3 different skulls of John the Baptist in his personal collection. All real. Allegedly. Back in the aisle, Alric finally draws his own blade. It's lighter, faster. He fights like someone trained to run and strike, not to hold ground. Ranulph fights like a siege engine, forward, relentless, loud. They knock over a font. A basin of holy water spills across the tiles. Neither of them slips. That would have been funny. But this isn't that kind of fight. This is grief and betrayal. Ranulph lost a brother on that crusade, and he's convinced the relic would have made it matter. Alric lost his faith somewhere in the desert, and he's not sure he wants it back. Ranulph lands a strike sharp right across Alric's ribs. Alric gasps, stumbles, catches himself on a pew, then retaliates. He doesn't aim for the torso. He strikes Ranulph's hand hard. The older knight drops his blade fingers, suddenly refusing to obey. Alric kicks it away, and for a second, everything goes still. Both men breathing hard, one bleeding more. The velvet-wrapped bundle lies between them as if waiting for judgment. "I didn't sell it," Alric says finally, "but I buried it where it belongs." Ranulph doesn't move, doesn't speak. Alric sheathes his sword. "I came here to tell you that," he adds. "You chose the sword, not me." And then he turns, limps down the aisle, leaves blood footprints behind him. The relic bundle still there. Ranulph stares at it, then at the empty pews, then at the altar, and finally at his hand, swelling now, already purpling. You don't wait to see if he picks it up. Instead, you retreat quietly back through the side hall, past a flickering icon of St. Jude, who is not looking impressed tonight. Here's a peculiar fringe fact. Before we go, some churches required knights to swear oaths not to draw steel inside, and kept dedicated monks as peace witnesses. If a blade was drawn, the record was written in red ink, sometimes accompanied by doodles of very disapproving saints. Outside, the bells stay silent. The cathedral stands still, and somewhere inside, a man decides whether he's still a crusader or just a thief with a broken hand. You've wandered past the cathedral, past the market stalls being packed up for the night, and into the lower quarter, where the streets narrow and the rules loosen. The smell of roasted onions, spilled ale, and something vaguely goat-like hangs in the air. You duck beneath a hanging sign shaped like a ladle, and nearly trip over a sleeping dog in a fur-lined cloak. It's the kind of neighborhood where deals are made, debts are paid, and dignity is negotiable. You're here for one thing, a duel born of the worst kind of gamble. You spot them in the alley. One is shirtless, the other is barefoot. Both are furious. The shirtless one, Tomas, is a burly red-haired man with the shoulders of a blacksmith and the voice of a drunk bard. He's holding a longsword with a chipped edge and glaring like his life's already over. The barefoot man, Ulrich, leans against the wall, chewing a sprig of mint. He wears a smug expression and a silver pendant, and he has to put it lightly, someone else's wife standing quietly behind him. Her name, you've heard, is Isabet. She looks amused. Here's the situation as told by the butcher's apprentice who snuck out behind you. Tomas lost a card game. Ulrich won. The stakes. Anything on his person. Tomas, in a moment of drunken idiocy, declared his wife was on his arm and therefore part of the bet. Then he laughed. Isabet did not. The bet was honored for 3 days. Tonight Tomas changed his mind. Hence swords, hence bare feet. Here's your hard historical fact. Medieval gambling could and often did lead to personal duels, especially when honor or property changed hands in moments of intoxicated bravado. There are records of men wagering horses' heirlooms, and even rooms in their own homes, then regretting it. Sometimes it ended in a tavern brawl. Sometimes it ended at dawn, steel-drawn witnesses weeping. Tomas strikes first, sloppy, fast, furious. Ulrich ducks smooth as butter on a hot brick and steps backward barefoot on the cobbles, sword half-drawn. He doesn't want to kill Tomas. He wants to humiliate him. Isabet leans against a post, arms folded, watching like she's seen this play before and knows how it ends. Tomas swings again. Misses. Ulrich slashes upward, nothing fatal, just a long, shallow line across Tomas's thigh. It's not a duel. It's a lesson. You should have wagered your shirt, Ulrich says casually. At least that washes. Tomas growls. He's limping now. The third strike is telegraphed from a mile away. Ulrich catches it, locks blades, and leans in. She came willingly, he whispers. She stayed because you thought it was funny. Isabet doesn't flinch. She just lifts a hand and tucks her hair behind one ear. Her ring finger is bare. Here's where historians argue, were these kinds of wager duels legal or just tolerated chaos? Some local laws explicitly forbade wagering spouses, while others didn't even mention women as property because they were presumed to be exactly that. In towns with written legal codes, challenges like this could result in court fines or exile. But in practice, honor ruled all. Ulrich disengages. Tomas stumbles back. The fight's slowing down now. Not because it's over, but because Tomas is tired. Not physically, emotionally. You see it settle into his shoulders, the realization. The wine's worn off. The rage has ebbed. All that's left is shame. He lowers his sword. Take her, he mutters. Ulrich tilts his head. I already did. A gasp ripples through the small crowd that's gathered half-hidden behind barrels and balconies. But Isabet just walks forward, not to Ulrich, to Tomas. She places something in his hand. You lean forward to see what it is. A ring. Her ring. She steps back, says nothing. But the look in her eyes says everything. I am not a wager. I am not a prize. Then she turns and walks down the alley alone. Both men just stand there. And the duel ends with no winner. Just silence. And the quiet groan of a city that's seen this story 1,000 times. Now for your fringe fact, some medieval wives were known to provoke duels deliberately, especially when trapped in marriages of political convenience. One 14th century record from Aragon includes a wife who offered her husband's favorite falcon to a rival knight just to instigate a challenge, and used the confusion to elope with a lute player. Back in the alley, Tomas slumps against the wall sword, dragging in the dust. Ulrich watches the retreating figure of Isabet, then finally slides his own blade away. Drinks, he mutters. Tomas doesn't answer. Ulrich shrugs barefoot on the cobbles and walks off in the opposite direction, and you step out of the alley, heart quiet, mind racing. Not every duel ends in blood. Some end in realization, some in regret. But all of them leave scars. You head for the next street. Someone's shouting about water again. You hope it's not another monk. The shouting grows louder as you follow the winding stone path into the center of town, where a square has become a swamp. Rainwater pools at ankle depth, sloshing through crates and discarded market cloth. Torches flicker from second-story windows, their glow reflecting off the water in jittery orange ripples. You stop at the edge of the square. Two men stand knee-deep in the flood, facing each other like gladiators trapped in a baptism gone wrong. Ropes are tied around both their waists, connected. A duel tethered not just by rage, but by actual twine. This is not a joke. This is a duel by drowning. One of the bystanders, a midwife, judging by her apron, leans toward you and mutters, "3 goats say the fat one drowns first." You nod politely. The fat one is named Burn, a butcher, covered in water-soaked leather and sweating like a roasting ham. His opponent is leaner, sharper, Milo, a cobbler with more bruises than customers. And yes, there is a reason for all this. A cart fell into the river, a cart filled with salted cod. Burn blames Milo for nudging it off the dock with a poorly placed bench. Milo says Burn had been drinking and parked it sideways. They both claim to have suffered great loss. They both refused mediation. They tied themselves together and stepped into the flooded square to fight it out. Which, believe it or not, is not entirely fictional. Here's your hard historical fact. Some medieval duels were fought in water, particularly in Germanic and Norse traditions. These combat in the river practices were used to settle everything from land disputes to theft. Fighters might be tied together, wade into a pond, and thrash about until one either drowned or gave up. Judges stood by. So did eager villagers, and so often did ducks. Milo strikes first. A fist straight to the jaw. Water sprays. Burn staggers back, but the rope pulls him forward again, tugged by the very man punching him. It's sloppy, spectacular. Each splash is its own little storm. Burn retaliates with both hands, grabbing Milo by the shoulders and shoving him under. For a moment, the square goes quiet. Milo is beneath the surface. The water trembles, then explodes as Milo bursts upward, coughing and swinging wildly. He clocks Burn across the ear. The butcher roars and throws himself forward, arms wide like a drowning bear. Here's where scholars still argue. Was this kind of combat legally recognized or just village spectacle? Some codes mention trial by water, but not in this context. Others suggest these were ad hoc justice rituals, informal, yes, but culturally binding. In many places, if both parties consented, and a local authority, say the town reeve or a respected tanner, watched, the result stood. Meanwhile, Milo gets creative. He steps sideways, trips Burn with the rope between them, and sits on his chest. Burn flails, yelling, "Get your bum off me, cobbler, you first," Milo replies, fist raised. The square laughs. Someone hands out bread. You watch from a barrel as the duel sloshes into its second round. Milo has stamina, but Burn has brute strength. When he finally rolls free, the entire square vibrates with the wave. He rises, drenched, furious eyes squinting through river scum. "I demand the duck test," he shouts. Everyone pauses. You raise an eyebrow. He points to the far end of the square, where a duck paddles in a barrel. If he floats like a duck, Burn says he's guilty. Laughter. Lots of it. But Milo agrees. They wade to the barrel, still roped together, and both climb in. It's the dumbest part of the night. It's also the most committed. They sit there for a full minute, wobbling shoulder to shoulder, while the duck looks at them with weary judgment. Eventually, Burn slips sideways, flips the barrel, and both men plunge back into the square. Neither drowns. Both stand, and finally laugh. Just like that, the fight dissolves into soaked laughter and mutual gasping. Burn throws an arm around Milo. "I still think you're a donkey." "Your wife likes donkeys," Milo replies. Burn shoves him, lightly, but it's done. The rope stays on. They just walk away, still tied, possibly forever. And here's your fringe tidbit for the road. Some medieval duels ended in forced friendship, a legal clause in rare town codes, where rivals who fought to a draw were publicly ordered to dine together weekly for a set period, sometimes up to a year. The punishment, enduring each other. You leave the flooded square behind boots, squishing the sound of wet footsteps fading into the night. Up ahead, something else waits, probably on fire. You don't even need to ask what's burning. You can smell it halfway down the next street. Charred herbs, scorched wood, and that unmistakable stench of accusation. The town square is crowded even at this hour. Lanterns hang from window shutters and makeshift poles. People are tense, quiet, watching. At the center stands a woman, tall, gaunt, barefoot, her gray hair loose around her shoulders like a shawl of cobwebs. Smoke curls around her from a pile of damp sage and rosemary burning at her feet. She's not tied to a stake. Not yet. But the man in front of her has a torch and a face like carved stone. He wears black leather, a heavy cloak, and a broad-brimmed hat marked with a red sigil. Witch hunter. You know the type. Zealot. Showman. Probably hasn't slept in days. Definitely hasn't smiled in years. Across from him, blocking the path to the pyre, is a mountain of a man with arms like hams and a smith's apron still smudged with ash. The blacksmith, holding a hammer. This is not a trial. This is a plague panic punch-out, and it's already begun. The witch hunter jabs his torch toward the woman, shouting something about sickness in the barley and goats being born wrong. The blacksmith doesn't answer with words. He steps between them and plants his hammer in the cobblestones with a noise like thunder. "She healed my son," he growls. "You lay one finger on her, and I'll flatten you into a sermon." The crowd doesn't cheer, but they don't stop him either. And here's your historical fact: accusations of witchcraft spiked during plagues and famines, when fear outpaced reason, and people needed anyone to blame. Women, especially older healers or midwives, were easy targets. Witch hunters traveled town to town, stoking fear with books, symbols, and pseudoscience. The hunter steps back, surprised, then lunges. He drops the torch, draws a short blade, and aims for the blacksmith's ribs. But the hammer swings first. It's not a clean hit, more of a shove using the flat of the head, but it moves the hunter 3 feet sideways. He stumbles, hits a crate, and curses in Latin. The woman doesn't move. The blacksmith squares his shoulders as if he's shoring up a wall. The hunter stands again, pulls down his mask, and spits. Her herbs are poison. Her herbs saved 20, the blacksmith snarls. You're the only poison here. The second swing connects. Not with the hammer this time, but a massive fist, right to the jaw. The hunter drops like a sack of sermons. The crowd ripples, not cheering, just shifting, like they're trying to decide whether this is salvation or a different kind of heresy. Here's where scholars still argue were witch hunters truly feared or secretly despised. Some argue they were welcomed, carrying the blessing of church and state. Others point out the bribes, the false accusations, and the trail of towns burned and never quite healed. In many cases, it wasn't the people who called the hunter. It was one man, one rival, one coward with connections. Back in the square, the blacksmith turns to the old woman. She's still staring at the fire. "I told you not to light it," she says quietly. "I thought it'd be symbolic," he mutters. "Symbolic smells like boiled feet." He snorts, offers her his arm. She takes it, and they walk away. No fanfare, no absolution, just steps fading into the dark. The witch hunter groans, barely conscious. Someone eventually helps him up. You think it's the baker or the butcher's son. Hard to tell. No one's in a hurry to restore his dignity. And here's your fringe detail: some villages refused to record witch trials at all out of fear that writing it down made it real. Instead, stories like this lived in the oral tradition, half folklore, half warning. In one town, every year on Plague's End anniversary, They left bread on the doorstep of the old woman who outlived the fire. Her name was never spoken, but everyone knew it. You move on smoke still stinging your nose, heart pounding a little harder than you expected. Because some duels don't happen on battlefields. Some happen in crowds. With fists and fire and silence. The alley ahead is narrow and strangely quiet. No singing, no shouting, no splashing duelists tied together with rope. Just the sound of a whetstone. A slow scrape, over and over and over. You round the corner and your nose fills with flour. The air hangs thick with it like a bakery exploded. And in the haze stands a man, broad-shouldered, white-dusted nose crooked from an old break, sleeves rolled past the elbow. The baker. He's sharpening a blade that was not meant for dough. Across from him, a tax collector stands fidgeting in polished boots, adjusting the brocade trim on his doublet, as if that will shield him. He's younger, softer, wearing the kind of smug expression that only survives the first 2 seconds of a fight. 5 coins, the taxman says, puffing his chest. You underreported. That's the fine. The baker tilts his head. For 3 loaves. The taxman sneers. For 3 loaves, 2 rolls, and your tone. The whetstone scrapes again, and then the baker says quite calmly, You overstepped. Now I'm gonna cut the crust off you. And thus begins the most carbohydrate-choked confrontation you've ever witnessed, a knife duel in a flour-choked alley over bread and bureaucracy. Here's your historical fact. Tax collectors in medieval towns were notorious for inciting violence, especially when backed by corrupt lords. Bakers, on the other hand, were essential and often fiercely defended by their neighborhoods. Some towns had literal bakers' alleys where fights with inspectors were considered almost seasonal events. No one wrote them down, but everyone knew the stories. The taxman draws his own dagger, slim, shiny, likely unused. The baker's knife short, curved, with a handle dark from years of dough and blood, not all of it animal. They circle in the flour haze. The first lunge is clumsy. Taxman tries for a quick jab. The baker bats it aside with a hot pie tin, yes, really, and elbows the man in the throat. The taxman coughs, staggers, flour puffing from his cloak. You came into my oven, the baker growls. Now you're gonna rise. You hear someone snort behind a barrel, probably the butcher. The taxman recovers. He's nimble, at least slashing shallowly across the baker's arm. A nick. Enough to draw blood and start the real fight. They grapple. They clash. The alley becomes a storm of flour and sweat and muttered curses. The baker rams the taxman into a wall, then yanks down a hanging sack, bursting it across both of them in a white explosion. They disappear. When the powder settles, they look like ghosts. Dusty, angry ghosts with cutlery. Here's the debate: how much violence were townsfolk allowed to use in self-defense against corrupt officials? Historians argue both sides. Technically, assaulting a tax-off officer was a hanging offense. But in practice, town charters, guild protections, and sheer numbers made it difficult to enforce, especially when the baker fed half the street and the taxman was new. The baker lunges again, knife low. The taxman sidesteps, grabs a rolling pin from a nearby crate. This alley is very on theme and smacks the blade away. But now he's using a rolling pin against a man whose arms are used to kneading dough the weight of bricks. You do the math. Crunch. The taxman hits the wall. He doesn't fall, but he stays there holding his side face pale. His dagger lies in a puddle of doughy water. The baker steps back, chest heaving, blood dripping from his forearm. You want 5 coins? He pants. Come back tomorrow. I'll bake them." He spits right onto a pile of spoiled rye and turns back toward his shop. The tax man just stays there. He won't press charges. He won't write it down. He'll remember it, though. And so will the neighborhood. Because here's your fringe tidbit. Some towns kept black books of taxmen who were unofficially banned from certain streets. They weren't punished, just redirected, sent to quieter quarters where the bakers didn't carry blades and the flour didn't rise like fog before a storm. You pass the alley as the baker disappears through his door, muttering about crusts and cretins. The air still smells of bread and blood. You move on. The night's grown darker, which, as you've learned by now, means someone else is probably sharpening something. The forge is still glowing. You spot the heat long before you feel it, a dull orange halo at the end of the lane like a coal breathing in the dark. Sparks drift up from the chimney into the black sky. The anvil rings once, then again, and then silence. Someone's waiting. You step into the circle of firelight, and there they are, two men barely speaking. One of them, the witch hunter from before. Face bruised, jaw stiff, hat gone. Red sigil still stitched into his collar like a stubborn accusation. The other, the blacksmith, again. But this time not defending a healer. Now he's defending himself. "Call me a heretic one more time," the blacksmith says, voice low, "and I'll brand you with your own badge." The witch hunter smirks. "I don't have to call you anything. The proof's on your wall." He gestures to a series of symbols above the forge, chalk marks, old and faded. Protective sigils. Norse. Maybe older. The kind of thing you scribble over your door for when pestilence comes knocking. Not church-sanctioned. But neither is this fight. You're about to witness a witch hunter versus blacksmith duel, a clash between zealotry and pure, unapologetic brute force. And it's happening with a hot iron. Here's your historical fact: blacksmiths were often feared as much as they were respected in medieval society. Their control of fire, their solitude, their ability to make tools and weapons gave them a mystical edge. In some communities, they were suspected of sorcery, especially if they refused to attend church, charged too much, or just had strange luck with ore. The witch hunter draws a dagger again. He favors speed over power. The blacksmith. He lifts an iron rod from the coals, glowing orange, hissing as it touches the cool air. No finesse, just heat. The fight is short, but it's vicious. The witch hunter darts in with surgical intent, aiming to cut, not kill. But the blacksmith doesn't fight like a soldier. He fights like a man who lifts anvils and throws out horseshoes when they crack wrong. He blocks with the iron. Every time their blades meet, his spits and sizzles, spraying sparks into the night. He doesn't just fight him, he forges him. Strike, block, clash, burn. The hunter's cloak catches first. A spark lands near his hip and begins to smolder. He slaps it out, cursing, goes for the throat. The blacksmith steps back, spins, and slams the flat of the glowing iron against the hunter's shoulder. The scream is sharp. The crowd, if it existed, would have gasped. But it's just you, the fire, and the two of them now dueling, not just over sigils, but over who gets to decide what's holy. Here's where historians split hairs. Was blacksmithing considered a cult, or just misunderstood? Some rural areas treated smiths like half-priests, half-hermits, invited to bless tools and lay iron charms on sick cattle. Others whispered about pacts, shadows in the forge, and anvils that rang 3 times after midnight, when no one was around. The hunter drops his blade. The blacksmith doesn't press the advantage. He just tosses the iron back into the coals. Next time you want a blade, he says, find someone else to make it. The witch hunter is on his knees now, teeth clenched, hand over the burned patch. The sigils above the forge still untouched, because they weren't drawn in ink. They were etched in soot and truth. Here's your fringe detail for this molten moment. Some blacksmiths were known to mark their tools with invisible runes, not magical in the wizard sense, but alchemical notations, signs of protection, or simply prayers written in a language only they knew. One recovered hammer from 1384 was found with tiny etched words reading, "Break bones, not vows." The witch hunter limps off, half smoking, half muttering. The blacksmith douses his face in a bucket and goes back to shaping a horseshoe like the duel never happened. And you feel warmer, but not safer. Because sometimes the most dangerous magic isn't cast, it's forged. The air's colder now, sharp, crisp enough to bite through wool and slip beneath your collar. The trees ahead are bare, clawing at the sky like frozen hands. And in the middle of the clearing, shining under the moon, is a lake. A frozen lake. You stop at the edge of the ice boots, crunching over frost-hardened grass, and peer out. Torches ring the edge of the water, casting long shadows over the glassy surface. And on that ice, two figures, both armed with axes, both pacing in a slow, wide circle. Welcome to the duel on ice, where heartbreak meets concussion in the most slippery venue imaginable. They're not soldiers, not knights, not even nobles. They're farmers, rivals, in love with the same woman, who, by the way, is watching, arms folded, jaw set, standing with the entire village on the shoreline, bundled in furs and regret. This isn't some grand romantic gesture. It's not even really about love anymore. It's about pride. Because one of them proposed, and the other claimed she had already promised herself to him. She denies both, but that didn't stop the challenge. And tonight, they fight for a woman who wants neither on an ice sheet barely thick enough to hold their egos. Here's your solid historical fact: duels on frozen lakes were not uncommon in Northern and Eastern Europe, especially in Scandinavia. Men fought with skates, axes, and sometimes blunted swords, local custom, personal grudges, or drunken bravado often the fuel. Injuries were frequent, deaths less so, but the embarrassment of falling before landing a blow eternal. The duel begins with caution. They move like men trying to look confident, but walk on buttered glass. Each step squeaks and slides. Axes glint in moonlight breath, fogging in great gusts. The first swing doesn't even connect. It spins the wielder instead, Torben the broader of the two. He stumbles, catches himself barely. Garrick, slimmer, faster, chuckles. His next move is lower, aimed at the legs. He slips mid-swing. Both crash to the ice in a tangle of limbs and profanity. The village laughs. The woman sighs. And the duel continues. Torben is first up. He swings hard, aiming high. Garrick ducks, slides under, and lands a glancing hit to Torben's hip. Not deep, but painful. "You always overswing," Garrick mutters. "And you never shut up," Torben growls. This is what we call a pettiness duel, which often outlives the reason it began. Historians debate whether these kinds of fights were encouraged by communities or tolerated in silence. In many northern villages, elders allowed such contests as a pressure valve, better to let rivals vent their nonsense on ice than in barns, or worse, with families caught in the middle. The fight drags on. Hits land, mostly on ice, a few on flesh. Both men are bleeding from the knuckles now. One has a cut over the eye. The other's nose might be broken. Neither has landed a decisive blow. Then crack, not bone, ice. A seam opens between them, just a hairline fracture, but they both freeze. This is the part no one plans for. Garrick whispers, "That was you." Torben glares. "Your head's heavier than mine." The crack widens. A rivulet of cold water glints beneath the surface. And that's it. They both stop. No more swings. Just heavy breathing and mutual agreement that neither of them wants to die under that woman's disapproving glare. So they do something completely unmedieval. They call it. Torben lifts his axe. Draw Garrick nods. Draw. A shout goes up from the crowd, not disappointment, but relief. The woman turns and walks away without a word. She's already halfway to the road before they even reach the edge of the lake. Here's your quirky fringe detail. Some ice duels ended with wagers paid to someone else, usually the widow, the mother, or in rare cases, the woman being fought over. It was seen as symbolic atonement for wasting everyone's time and risking valuable limbs. As the villagers begin to disperse, Torben mutters, "She was never going to say yes, was she?" Garrick shrugs. "Not in 100 winters." They walk off together, axes dragging behind them, bruised but not broken. And you hang back, watching the crack in the ice. Because sometimes the sharpest cut doesn't come from steel. It comes from seeing yourself clearly, even if you have to fall flat on your face first. The tavern near the edge of town is quieter than it should be. You'd expect singing, laughter, maybe a lute that's slightly out of tune. Instead, the only sound is chewing, slow, deliberate chewing, and the occasional grunt of someone who's too tired to chew quietly. Inside, it smells of meat beer and very bad decisions. You step through the doorway and pause. At the largest table, two men sit across from each other, hunched over wooden bowls. One wears a leather apron streaked with old blood. The butcher. The other wears black robes and a hood. His belt is studded with pouches. His boots are spotless. The executioner. They look almost identical, at least from the shoulders down, thick wrists, square jaws, grim stares. But while the butcher smells of salt and fat, the executioner smells like clean steel and sweat. Between them, a single cleaver, and a dispute that can only be described as an identity crisis turned full-blown duel. It started with a joke, or maybe an insult. "You chop pigs," the executioner reportedly said. "I chop traitors." "And yet we both end up in blood up to our knees," the butcher replied. Now they're here. Because the tavern's been whispering for weeks that the executioner learned his trade from a pig farmer. And the butcher, he's been muttering that half of the heads the executioner severs would have been easier to cut if they'd been properly bled and hung. The challenge was inevitable. Here's your historical fact. Executioners were often social outcasts, forced to live on the fringes of towns, forbidden to touch food in markets, and buried in separate cemeteries. But butchers respected even essential. The skill sets overlapped, and that led to tension, especially in towns with only one decent blade between them. The cleaver on the table glints in candlelight. Neither man reaches for it. Instead, they stand. The table is cleared by the barkeep in record time. And without a word, both walk outside into the stable yard under a sky heavy with snow and expectations. No seconds, no audience beyond a handful of farmhands smoking quietly near the fence. Just a butcher and an executioner, each convinced the other is a fraud. The duel begins with formal posture. Both men circle. The executioner draws a long, curved blade, polished, ritualistic, intimidating. The butcher hefts his own cleaver, shorter, thicker, stained from 1,000 morning slaughters. They clash. Steel rings out against steel. Sparks fly as blade meets blade, the sounds too sharp, too intentional to be random. And here's where historians still argue, did executioners and butchers really duel over professional pride? Some accounts claim yes. Others insist these are dramatized folk tales passed down in pub ballads. But there's at least one surviving Swiss guild record from the 15th century detailing a sanctioned contest between a butcher and an executioner over guild jurisdiction and public respect. Back in the yard, the fight's heating up. The executioner is precise slashes aimed to end things quickly. But the butcher, he fights mean, uses his shoulder, uses his elbows. At one point, he headbutts the executioner in the chest and nearly knocks him into a pile of hay. "You ever have to clean a carcass?" he growls. "Or do you just swing and let someone else scrape the bits off?" The executioner doesn't reply. He just lunges forward and lands a cut across the butcher's shoulder, clean fast, no hesitation. The butcher stumbles, snarls, then drops his cleaver. The crowd gasps, but he doesn't give up. He tackles the executioner instead, grabs his belt, yanks him forward, and brings both of them crashing into a trough of half-frozen water. It's absurd. It's perfect. They rise soaked in steaming blood mixing with snowmelt, breathing hard, too tired to keep fighting. They both lean on the trough. The executioner coughs. "You hit like a cow. You cut like one," the butcher mutters. And just like that, it's done. They both know it. No one won, but neither lost. And in towns like this, that's enough. Here's your fringe detail in a few German towns. The local butcher was the unofficial backup executioner used when the real one was sick, drunk, or too unpopular to appear in public. Records exist of butchers standing in during high-profile hangings and being paid in sausages. The two men walk back inside dripping, the cleaver still on the table, untouched. You smile to yourself, because some duels aren't about victory. They're about proving that no matter how sharp your blade is, you still have to clean it at the end of the day. The bells of Venice don't toll, they hum. Low and slow, vibrating through stone streets and over silent canals like a heartbeat under silk. The fog tonight is a veil light, but thick enough to smudge the edges of gondolas and blur the glow of lanterns. You follow the music. It spills from an open window in the Palazzo Rossa, where a masquerade ball is reaching its midnight peak. And somewhere inside, steel is about to sing. You slip through the back courtyard and into the great hall where feathers flutter and sequins flash in the candlelight. Perfume hangs in the air like powdered tension. Dancers whirl, laughter twinkles, and masks conceal the best and worst of intentions. You spot him immediately. The dancing duelist, Leonato. Slim, dazzling eyes sharp behind a silver mask. His rapier is piece-tied at his side, but that's a joke. Everyone knows he keeps a second blade hidden in his viola case. And he's already scanning the room. He's not just here to dance. He's here to fight. And across the ballroom, leaning against a marble pillar, stands his rival, Cesare di Foscari, heir to an old family, known for two things: dueling and losing with absolute poetic drama. You're about to witness a masked ballroom duel where style matters as much as the stab. Here's your historical fact: duels in Renaissance Italy often broke out during social events, especially among nobles. Masquerades were perfect venues. Everyone already wore masks. Everyone carried a blade, and insults could be exchanged behind a fan or a wine cup before flashing steel. Leonato crosses the floor like a waltz in slow motion. Cesare raises a glass. "Did you think she wouldn't tell me?" Leonato doesn't blink. "I assumed she'd be too bored to bother." And that's it. No formal challenge. No glove. Just shing two blades drawn in the middle of a minuet. Dancers scatter. A lute player shrieks. A lady in peacock feathers faints, perhaps just for the drama. The duel begins. They circle steps smooth as the music still playing from the far corner, some trio too stunned to stop. It's elegant, but deadly. Cesare lunges first classic textbook thrust. Leonato parries with a flick, turns the motion into a spin, and slashes Cesare's shoulder. A red line blooms through brocade. Cesare stumbles but recovers. "You fight like you flirt," he hisses. "With your hips." Leonato grins. "And you fall like a curtain." Here's the scholarly debate: were ballroom duels sanctioned by hosts, or simply tolerated until the blood hit the tile? Some letters from Venetian families imply that such spectacles were discouraged but expected. In certain circles, losing a dance was more embarrassing than losing a duel. Back in the ballroom, Cesare charges again, this time with fury. His blade lashes out, catching Leonato's sleeve and drawing a shallow cut across the arm. But it's too much motion, too loud. Leonato sidesteps and lets Cesare's own weight drag him forward straight into a statue of the Virgin, whose upraised hand snags his mask and yanks it free. Gasps, whispers, scandal. Leonato flourishes his blade, points it to Cesare's throat, but does not strike. Instead, he leans in. "I suggest you retreat, signore, before you bleed on the marble." Cesare lowers his blade. The duel ends without death. Just bruised pride, smeared mascara, and one dramatically torn sash. He storms out. Leonato twirls the blade, once sheathes it in a single motion, and walks back to the wine table like nothing happened. The music somehow resumes. Here's your fringe detail: some dance manuals from the 16th century include footwork diagrams that double as duel stances. It wasn't just about rhythm, it was about balance. A good dancer could become a dangerous opponent, especially when wearing heels. You follow Leonato as he slips through a side door and out into the fog again. He doesn't look back. But just before he vanishes into the mist, he pulls a rose from his doublet, tosses it behind him, and disappears. You pick it up, it's fake. Of course it is. The duelist never leaves the real thing behind. The countryside is quiet now, moon-drenched fields and rustling grass stretching out beneath the stars, like the kingdom's forgotten bedsheet. You follow a dirt path between crooked fences, the kind built to lean rather than stand. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays once. It doesn't sound concerned. You should be. Ahead, two men are arguing, loudly, and between them stands a goose. Yes, a real one. Feathers fluffed, head cocked, eyes gleaming with the primal malice of a bird that knows exactly how this night ends, loudly and with flapping. You've found what locals call the duel with the goose as judge. Let's set the scene. Two farmers' brothers actually have decided to settle a property line dispute. The only way that truly makes sense, by letting their father's old goose choose the dueling ground. Yes, really. Whichever way she waddles, that's where they fight. Because, and I quote, she's the only one in this family with any damn sense. And here's your strange but true historical fact: animals were often invoked in folk justice rituals in medieval Europe. Pigs were put on trial. Roosters were asked to testify. And in a few rural corners of France and Bohemia, family disputes were adjudicated by letting a cow, dog, or bird pick a direction. Superstition. Sure, but it made someone feel better. Tonight the goose waddles west, straight into a field of particularly irritable chickens. So of course, that's where the fight begins. The brothers step into the clearing, sleeves rolled, pitchforks in hand, not to stab, just to jab, like angry shepherds playing chess with hay. The older brother Yannick goes wide with his first thrust, too theatrical. The younger Marek ducks and sweeps low, catching Yannick's leg and knocking him backward into a coop. Feathers explode. A hen screeches. The goose watches, unimpressed. "You always take Ma's side," Yannick bellows as he stumbles back up. "Ma liked me better because I didn't steal her jam," Marek fires back. The pitchforks clash again, wood against wood, iron tips scraping across leather boots and chicken crates. It's not graceful. It's not even particularly effective. But it's honest. Here's the debate: were these folk duels real duels or just rural tantrums with sticks? Scholars can't agree. Some suggest these fights served as community theater, unofficial but binding in spirit. Others argue that in a world without easy access to courts, this was the court. Back in the field, the goose honks, loudly. Everyone stops. The chickens scatter in 6 directions. Yannick's pitchfork is caught in a fence. Marek steps forward, ready to land a final jab, and slips on a chicken. Not over, on it. His foot lands square on its back. The bird shrieks, flaps, and launches him forward face first into the mud. Yannick bursts out laughing. And that's it. The duel dissolves into cackling, feather plucking, and 2 brothers too tired to care about who owns the turnip patch. The goose waddles over and bites Yannick on the ankle. Hard. Justice Marek mumbles into the dirt. And here's your fringe detail: one 14th century court record from Moravia references a witness goose whose movements were interpreted as divine judgment in a theft dispute. The man found guilty claimed he was framed by poultry. The judge fined him anyway and kept the goose. As the brothers limp home together, you linger behind, watching the bird preen victoriously. You're not sure who won, but you're definitely sure who's in charge. And her name is probably Margot, or Death Honk. Either way, she's terrifying. You move on deeper into the country. Only one duel left tonight, and it's waiting beneath a tree. The wind changes just past the orchard, a hush that carries the scent of wet leaves, old bark, and something else. Ash. Maybe memory. The road narrows into a footpath curling into the woods like a secret. You follow it slower now because everything feels slower. The earth is soft beneath your boots. The moon filters through the branches like a fading lantern. And then you see it. A tree. Alone. Broad and heavy, its roots exposed like knuckles. Its limbs stretch wide, curved by time, and at its base, beneath the twisted shadows, 2 figures face each other. No crowd, no witnesses. Just you and them. One is a monk, robes frayed hood down, walking stick planted in the earth like a grave marker. His hair is white, but his stance is firm. A satchel hangs at his side, worn and patched. You recognize him. Brother Aldwin, the one who left the abbey 20 years ago. The other is a mercenary, lean, scarred, one hand gripping a sword, the other a flask. No armor, just a coat stitched with patches and buttons that don't match. He's taller, younger, meaner. This is no accident. This is a final grudge duel. I said I'd find you, the mercenary murmurs. The monk nods. And I said I wouldn't run. They both look tired, but determined. Here's your historical fact. Pilgrimage paths often became stages for private duels, especially when 2 men had unfinished business and knew the courts wouldn't solve it. The church discouraged bloodshed on sacred roads, but it happened. Under trees, near shrines, at the edges of villages where no priest could see. The monk doesn't carry a sword. He carries a staff. But don't mistake that for mercy. The fight begins without a word. The mercenary moves first, quick, sharp, a cut toward the monk's side. Aldwin steps aside, parries with the shaft of his staff, and twists, forcing the mercenary to pivot wide. It's elegant, measured, like a man who's been waiting years to do this right. "You let him die," the mercenary growls. "I let him choose," the monk answers. A blade whistles past Aldwin's cheek. He ducks low and jabs staff to ribs. The mercenary grunts, stumbles back, breath steaming. The staff isn't sharpened, but it hurts. Here's where historians still debate how often did monks fight after leaving the cloister. Some argue they took vows too seriously to draw weapons again. Others note a handful of wandering brothers who carried cudgels served as peacekeepers, or even stranger taught swordplay under assumed names. The mercenary swings harder now. He's not holding back. Not anymore. Steel flashes, wood answers, back and forth, blow for blow. Neither man speaks. They've said everything already. In letters, in silence, in the years between now and whatever betrayal they left behind. Finally, Aldwin lands a strike, a low sweep that knocks the mercenary's leg from under him. He crashes to the ground. His sword flies from his hand. He doesn't rise, just sits there, breathing, bleeding from the temple, looking up at the monk whose staff is still poised. "Do it," the mercenary whispers. Aldwin lowers the staff. "No," he says. "That's your way." And here's your fringe detail: some recorded duels ended with oaths of silence, a mutual agreement that the grudge was ended, never to be spoken of again. Sometimes sealed with wine, sometimes with blood, sometimes just with leaving. The mercenary wipes his face, grabs a handful of dirt, lets it fall through his fingers. Then he gets up and walks away. No words, just steps fading into the trees. Aldwin sits beneath the gnarled oak, breathing heavy staff across his lap. Not victorious, but not broken either. You stay a moment longer, then turn, back through the woods, back toward the distant sound of birds waking, and the faintest blue at the edge of the sky. Now, let your breath settle. Let your shoulders drop. The duels are done for now. The swords are sheathed. The grudges paused. You walk slowly now, the world dimming around you, like a hearth growing quiet at midnight. There are still echoes, soft clangs, muttered insults, the flap of a goose wing, but they're distant, dulled by time and sleep. The road beneath your feet becomes soft, weightless, like walking across parchment. Remember the night in the garden, the jester under the gallows, the brothers with their goose judge, they're part of the past. Now silly, solemn, strange. History, like dreams, doesn't always make sense. And that's okay. Let the torches go out. Let the taverns close. Let the ice crack the forge, cool the relics rest. You are safe here. Let go of the blade. Let go of the noise. Let go. You're already halfway to sleep, and the rest of the journey, you don't need me for that. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.